Hello again, and welcome back to The Night Reader. I'm your storyteller tonight, and as always, I hope you're somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, somewhere you can stay a while. If this is your first time, welcome. You're among friends here, even if the stories we tell tend to follow you out of the dark and into the parts of your mind that don't like to be named. So turn your lights low, pull the blanket a little tighter, and breathe slowly. You're not alone. I wasn't supposed to inherit anything. My mother used to joke that our family legacy was anxiety and clutter, passed down like porcelain with hairline cracks. No gold, no real estate. Just a garage full of water-damaged Christmas decorations and a stack of unopened mail held together with melted candle wax. So, when I got the call about Hall, I assumed it was a mistake. A legal firm from Massachusetts. Dry voice. Precise syllables. Your great aunt, Agatha Mallory, has named you sole inheritor of her estate. Effective immediately. I didn't even know I had a great aunt. My mother had never mentioned her, and even if she had, Agatha Mallory sounded more like a character in a Victorian novel than a real person. The caller gave me the address. An actual manor house. Yes, manor. On the edge of a town called Rookridge. Population 712 and falling. I looked it up. The house had no online photos, no listings, no records after 1973. The next day, a key arrived in the mail. Old brass, cold to the touch. Attached to it was a folded slip of paper. One sentence in ink the color of dried blood. Don't open the box unless the house opens first. I almost threw it away. I didn't. The road to Rookridge looked like something out of a fever dream. Miles of nothing but rotted fields and tree stumps, fog clinging to the bark like mold. The sky never fully committed today. It stayed that slate-gray, sunless stretch that made it hard to tell the time. I passed no cars, heard no birds. And when I crossed the rusted "Welcome to Rookridge" sign, the air shifted, heavier, like I'd driven into a pocket of different weather, different rules. Hall was waiting. It stood on a hill just outside town, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that leaned like it had survived a war. The house was wrong. Not haunted-looking, not decayed. Just expectant. 3 stories tall, built from a stone too dark to be granite. The windows were long and thin like closed eyes. Every shutter was nailed shut. The lawn had no weeds, no grass, just bare soil, and one path leading up to the door made from polished black brick. I parked. The key in my coat pocket grew warm. I approached the door. It opened before I touched it. Not wide, just enough. The foyer was still. No dust, no cobwebs, no smell. Just a silence so deep it felt like pressure. The wallpaper was blood-red velvet, peeling in places to reveal symbols beneath, scratched into the plaster like veins. A grandfather clock ticked in the far corner. It wasn't telling the correct time. It was counting. I stepped further in. The door clicked shut behind me. The lights were gas-powered, not electric. They flared on in sequence, leading me down a narrow hallway lined with portraits. Each one was nearly identical. A figure in black, seated, their face blurred or turned away. No plaques, no dates. The hallway led to a library, floor-to-ceiling books, leather, cloth, even some spines bound in what looked too close to skin. A fireplace at the center, unlit. Above the mantel, a portrait of a woman with her back to the viewer, dressed in mourning black, long silver braid trailing down her spine. The nameplate beneath what read, simply, Agatha, my great aunt. The fire lit itself. I spent the night in a second-floor bedroom, lavender wallpaper, a canopy bed, a desk with a locked drawer. The room had no mirror. None of the rooms did. Even the bathroom had a blank wall above the sink, like the house was trying to forget itself. At 2:47 a.m., I woke to the sound of something shifting beneath the floor. Not creaking, sliding, like wood being pulled against wood. I stood. The floorboards near the far wall were raised, just slightly, enough to see. I knelt and pried one loose. Beneath it was a shallow cavity lined with faded red velvet, and inside that, a box, Wooden, blackened, unmarked, no lock, but it felt heavier than it should be. I remembered the note. Don't open the box unless the house opens first. The house had opened, so I lifted the lid. Inside was something wrapped in old lace. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a journal, thick, bound in cracked leather. Smelled of smoke and something older. No name on the cover. I opened it. The first page was blank. So was the second, and third, and fourth. Then, on page 7, a message had been carved, not written into the paper, as though by fingernail. You are the reader now. Someone must hold the door. I felt something shift behind me. I turned. The fire in the hearth had gone out. The room was black, but something stood just outside the circle of light from the window, watching, breathing. Its outline was too tall, its joints bent the wrong way, and in its hands it held a mirror, facing away from me. As I stared, the box in my lap pulsed with warmth. The journal flipped to the next page on its own. A new line appeared, etched in with slow, deliberate pressure. Do not look into its eyes. Do not answer if it knocks. And above all, do not read aloud. I closed the book. Hard. The figure didn't move. Not yet. But something else did. The floor, the walls, the house. It was breathing now, waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to read. The figure in the window didn't move. Neither did I. We stared at each other across a silence so thick I could feel it pooling in my lungs. It didn't blink, didn't breathe. It just stood there, cradling that mirror against its chest like a priest bearing a relic. I didn't want to see what was in it. I couldn't. I didn't move until the first fingers of dawn bled through the curtain. And when I looked again, the figure was gone. The floorboard where I'd found the box was closed, not nailed down, not sealed, just shut, like nothing had happened, like the house was pretending again. I didn't sleep again after that. I spent the morning wandering Briar Hall. Each hallway felt longer than it had the day before. Rooms shifted. Doors that should have led back to the foyer now opened into places I hadn't seen. Dust-choked staircases, crooked linen closets full of clothes that didn't belong to anyone I'd ever known. One room was filled with clocks, all ticking out of time with each other. All pointed to different years. One stopped at 1923. Another jumped between 1951 and 20,007 every few seconds. A small gold pocket watch near the door had no hands at all, just a single spinning gear behind the glass. Above the fireplace in that room was a framed quote, burned into the wood. We are pages in a book that will not stop writing itself. I didn't stay. That afternoon, I found the study. A room I hadn't seen before, but one that felt like it had seen me. The walls were lined with cabinets, black metal, locked. There were no books, no pens, just the smell of paper soaked in mildew and oil. The desk was huge, carved from something dark, veined like petrified wood. Atop it, a stack of folders, each one labeled in careful handwriting. Incident 07, basement door, the paper voice. Incident 11, study mirror, covered. Incident 13, attic, discontinued use. Incident 17, archive, reopened incident 27, reader assigned 331. The last one made me freeze. Reader assigned. It was dated 3 days ago. Same day I'd arrived. I opened the file. Inside, a short paragraph, typed, cold. Reader 331 accepted the box. Subject untrained, unaware, previously unexposed. House reaction immediate. Containment threshold breached at 02:47 hours. Commencement authorized. Begin, archive, unsealing. There was a map paper-clipped beneath it, crude, hand-drawn with the outline of Briar Hall at the top. It showed a staircase I hadn't seen before, drawn in red ink. The archive below. My hands were sweating by then. The paper was damp. But my eyes locked onto a line in the bottom corner, written in rushed, slanted ink that didn't match the typed text. If you start to remember pages that aren't there, leave the house immediately. The staircase was hidden behind the bookshelf in the west hall. I found it by accident, or maybe it found me. The shelf groaned as I passed, the scent of old ash wafting through a crack I hadn't noticed. Behind the shelf, a metal door, no handle, no hinges, only a keyhole shaped like a tear. The brass key that had arrived with the house fit too easily. When I turned it, the door sank inward and disappeared like it had never existed. And behind it, stairs, stone, wet, uneven. Descending into the archive, the air smelled of wax, iron, and something faintly sweet like rotting fruit. I went down. The stairs felt endless. The light dimmed with every step. Soon I was moving through the dark with only the glow of the journal from the box, which pulsed faintly whenever I paused. The further I went, the more I heard things. Pages turning, faint whispering, sobbing. Once, I heard a voice call out, "Please put me back." I didn't look. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a wide corridor, the ceiling arched and low. Shelves stretched out in every direction, each one packed with books. Not normal books. No titles, no authors, just symbols burned into their spines. Some glowed softly, others were pulsing, and some bled. Literally, pages leaking black ink like open veins. As I moved through them, the journal in my hand grew hotter, until finally it flipped itself open to a new page, etched in fresh scratches. "Do not shelve yourself. Not again." I turned a corner and saw a figure. Not the one from my room. This one was seated. Old, still, cloaked in parchment. Its hands were made of paper, folded tightly into joints. Its head was a book, closed, stitched with wire. It sat behind a desk made of bones arranged like branches, and in front of it an empty slot, like it had been waiting for a new entry. It looked at me, or tried to, and the air around it thickened. Then it said one word, in a voice like tearing paper. "Reader." I almost dropped the journal. Its cover had begun to unravel, thin strips of leather curling away like something waking up. The paper thing didn't move, but it spoke again. Page 127. I flipped through the journal. There was no page 127. It ended at 113, but as I stared, pages began to grow, unfurling from the spine like petals, dry and hot. My name was at the top of the new page, followed by text I hadn't written. "Reader 331 has entered the archive. Memory degradation, 12%. Door stability critical. If page reaches 147, reader must be filed." I slammed the book shut. The paper thing tilted its head, like it was sad or hungry. I backed away, tried to retrace my steps, but the shelves were different now, taller, hungrier. Some of the books were whispering in voices I recognized. My mother, my childhood best friend, my own voice saying things I'd never said. And, in the distance, I heard the echo of footsteps, long, deliberate. The figure from the night before. It was here, hunting me through the shelves. The mirror it carried reflected the books, but the images moved wrong. Pages, turning backward, then forward, then bleeding. I ran until I found the stairwell again, but it wasn't empty. It had filled with pages, ripped, folded, moving like a tide, rising fast, suffocating. I turned back toward the archive, the book still in my hand, and it opened to one last line. Choose the shelf, or choose the page. I don't remember getting back to the bedroom, but I woke in the bed, covered in paper cuts, the journal on the nightstand, its cover sealed again, the last page empty, except for a single new line. One down. 6 remain. The archive is not closed. The room was dark, but in the corner something began to move. And this time, it was holding two mirrors. One for me and one for who I used to be. When I woke, the mirrors were gone, but the walls remembered them. Reflected light still shimmered faintly across the wallpaper, like the memory of a fire long extinguished. I could trace the outlines with my eyes. Two tall ovals etched in frost and dust, overlapping slightly, as if the second mirror had tried to nest inside the first. I didn't touch them, because I was starting to understand what touching things in Briar Hall meant. Contact was a form of consent, and every object here waited patiently to be noticed, to be used, to become a door. The journal lay where I'd left it. Its cover was whole again, but the pages had multiplied overnight. What had once been barely over 100 now stretched past 140. The new pages weren't blank. They were written in a hand I recognized. My own. Except, I hadn't written them. Each entry was a perfect echo of my voice, my phrasing, my doubts, my past. Memories I'd never written down, but had thought. Moments I'd forgotten on purpose. Private. Terrible. There, in ink. February 14th, the date I lied about forgetting. April 3rd, when I told her I loved her and didn't mean it. July 19th, the night I knew Reed was unraveling but said nothing. It wasn't just recording my life. It was cataloging my failures. By page 145, the ink had begun to bleed. Dark brown. Thick. Almost sticky to the touch. It smeared when I turned to 146. This one had no memory. Only a phrase scrawled diagonally across the entire page. Don't let it write 147. Below it, in smaller print, if 147 completes, you will be shelved. I stared at the page so long my eyes began to water, and that's when the room began to shake. It wasn't violent, not an earthquake. It was subtle, like the house was adjusting, breathing, preparing. The floor beneath the bed dipped slightly, not enough to notice unless you were looking, unless you were already paranoid. I was. So I followed the slant to the far corner of the room. There, under the faded floral rug, was a door. Thin, wood, soft with age. Smaller than it should have been. Like it had been built for someone younger. Or someone less complete. A child's crawl space, maybe. The key from my coat pocket vibrated gently, not glowing, just humming, calling. I knelt. The door opened without resistance. Behind it, a crawl space filled with the scent of old paper and mold. And on the far wall, scrawled in charcoal, page 147 writes you. I crawled inside. The passage was long, far longer than it should have been. As I moved, the walls narrowed. The air grew warmer, more humid. The scent of wet parchment thickened. Eventually, I reached a chamber. It wasn't part of the house. Not really. It felt attached, a tumor grown from memory and mildew. The walls were lined with paper, not wallpaper, pages, nailed, pasted, melted together, stories, journal entries, notes, hundreds of voices screaming over each other in desperate ink. At the center, a chair, facing a single mirror, and on the mirror my name, etched, carved deep. Below it, a single line. Author of 147. I backed away. The walls breathed, and the journal in my hand flared hot. I opened it. Page 147 had begun to write itself. The top line read, "He returned to the place he swore he wouldn't." Below it, he read the page aloud. My mouth was dry. The words moved as I watched. New lines appeared as I stepped. He took another step. He opened the drawer. He touched the pen. I hadn't done those things, not yet. But the page was writing my intentions, predicting me, or deciding for me. My hands shook. The journal felt like it was growing heavier. fused to my skin. I closed it, but it didn't stay closed. The binding throbbed. The words began to write faster. Now it was writing in second person. You try to run. You fail. I dropped the book. It hit the ground with a sound like a throat closing. And from the mirror, my reflection began to peel. It didn't crack, didn't shatter. It peeled like wallpaper, slowly sloughing away from the glass. Beneath it, not a reflection, a door. Behind the mirror, something stepped forward. Not the figure from before, not the paper thing. This one was worse. It wore my face like a scarf, loosely wrapped, barely hiding what was underneath. Where its eyes should have been, torn out pages. Where its teeth should have been, slivers of broken glass. It reached out a hand, long, ink-stained fingers dragging down the frame of the mirror door, and beckoned. The walls closed in behind me. Pages began to fly from the surface like bats, shrieking, tearing, and on the floor, page 147 changed again. The final line. You were the author, now you are the ink. I didn't scream. I grabbed the journal and ran, not toward the mirror, back through the crawl space. The house was screaming, not with sound, with pressure. The walls bending, the floor trying to decide if it was liquid, the hallway looping behind me. I burst into the bedroom just as the door slammed shut. Hard, a final punctuation, and then silence. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours. The journal sat beside me. Page 147 was gone, ripped clean. The next page, 148, was blank, for now. But the room wasn't the same. There was a mirror now, tall, framed in rusted iron, and in it, not me. Someone older, someone hollow-eyed, someone with ink on their hands. They raised a hand. So did I, but mine shook. Theirs didn't. On the floor beside the bed, a new note, not folded, not signed, just there. You've read one. 6 remain. The archive is watching, and soon the next page will begin itself. There was a knock at the door. Not the front door of the house, the bedroom door. 3 times. Software precise, like punctuation. I didn't move, didn't answer. The mirror reflected me now, just me. But the frame continued to hum faintly, like a string pulled taut across an unseen throat. Then came a whisper from the other side of the door. Page 148 is ready. The voice wasn't mine, but it used my tone. The same cadence I'd heard in the journal's entries. It was my voice as remembered by something that had only ever read me. I backed away slowly. My hand brushed the edge of the journal on the nightstand. It was warm again, pages shivering like leaves. I flipped to 148, still blank. Then, just as I watched, ink began to bloom across the top. One line, handwritten, but not in my hand. Today you'll find the shelf, but you won't find your name. The house had changed again. It always did. Now the second floor was missing. The staircase ended in a wall of pages, torn and nailed in place, each one featuring a single word in a language I couldn't read. I turned back. The hall was longer, stretching toward a wing of the house I hadn't explored, didn't know existed. The air grew colder as I walked. The lights flickered. Briar Hall's gas lamps ran on nothing I could trace. They hissed and popped, but never burned out unless the house wanted them to. I passed through a doorway that hadn't been there before. A narrow corridor led downward at an impossible angle. Walls pressed close. Bookshelves appeared on either side, low, crude, made from bent wood and held together with wire. Most of the books were unbound. Some were scorched. Others were wrapped in cloth, as though someone had tried to bury them without dirt. One shelf was empty, perfectly clean. Its label, unclaimed. I stopped. Something about it pulled at me. The shelf didn't carry a name, didn't carry a date, only a symbol carved into the wood, therefore a triple dot triangle. I stared at it too long, felt it twitch. The journal fluttered. Page 148 filled with new text. You stood before the unclaimed shelf for 12 seconds. You felt it notice you. You thought for a moment that it was yours. You were wrong. Then a blank line. Then, but it wants you anyway. A soft hiss behind me. I turned. The paper wall at the top of the stairwell had vanished. In its place, a room. Circular. Diamond soins. Dozens of shelves. A spiral structure, like a snail's shell carved from the bones of unread things. The books here were larger, heavier, alive. They breathed. I could hear the pages shifting inside them like lungs drawing damp air. Each shelf had a name. Some human, some symbols. One was labeled Reader 002. Another, He Who Closed the Door. One near the base simply said The Reflected. I looked for mine. Nothing. No 331. No Reader 331. Not even unfiled. My shelf wasn't there. The journal pulsed again. Page 148 darkened at the edges. Words arrived in bursts now. Jittery. Sloppy. You are not in the archive yet. You are still being read. You are not written enough. You are a draft. You must choose what gets erased. The floor beneath the shelves shifted, wood and paper peeled away, revealing another staircase, leading down. I descended. I didn't mean to. I don't remember choosing to. I was just moving. The stairs ended in a stone room. No books, no pages, only mirrors, dozens of them, each facing inward, forming a perfect circle. At the center, a pedestal. On the pedestal, a book. Thin, unmarked, but glowing faintly. I approached. The mirrors showed different versions of me. Some older, some younger, one missing a face entirely, one with black ink pouring from its mouth as it screamed silently at the glass. I reached the pedestal, opened the book. Inside, a list. Lena, page 127. Read, page 143. Redacted, page 147. You, pending. The next name was written in fresh ink, one I hadn't heard in years. Marcel, page 148. Marcel. She was my first girlfriend. 15. Shy. Bright. Obsessed with old books and antique bookstores. She loved riddles. Loved writing letters. The kind of girl who used sealing wax even in emails. We broke up after she called me surface level. I remember her exact words. You don't look inward. You just reflect what's shown to you. I laughed then. Told her to enjoy her poetry. We never spoke again. I heard years later she died. An apartment fire. Alone. No survivors. No one found her body. Now her name was here. Waiting. The journal lit up. Burned almost. Page 148 filled instantly. You are the ink now. Write or be written. Summon her or take her place. I dropped the journal, stepped back. But the pedestal was gone, replaced by a door. Old, blackened. A symbol burned into the center. Therefore the same as the shelf, the same as before, the unclaimed. I didn't open it. It opened itself. Inside, Marcel, not screaming, not burning, just sitting, reading a book that looked like mine. She looked up and smiled. I was wondering when you'd show up. Her voice hadn't changed, but her eyes had. Solid black, no whites, no pupils, ink. I don't know what I'm doing, I said. She tilted her head. I do. She stood, held out her hand. Her skin crackled like old pages. I didn't take it. I'm not ready. You never were, she said. But you read. You always read. And now, they're almost done writing you. The door began to close behind me. Make your choice, she said. Shelf or page? I turned, ran. I don't know how I escaped. Only that I did. I woke up in the study, covered in torn paper. Page 148 of the journal was gone. Page 149 had begun. He ran again. But the shelf still waits. And she is still reading. The journal didn't stop writing, even after I closed it, even after I tried to hide it under the floorboards. I could still hear the scratch of pen on paper. Slow, steady, patient. Like a heartbeat I couldn't shut off. By morning it had filled 3 more pages. None of them mine. They were hers. Marcel. Page 149 bore my name, but the ink belonged to her. Not literally. The script had changed. Elegant, cursive, too precise to be mine. Every word felt measured, deliberate. The entry began like this. He still sees me as a memory. That's the problem with him. He never learned that a memory left alone grows teeth. Then, I am not waiting. I am watching. And he keeps reading. I didn't leave the study. Not that day. Not after seeing her in the unclaimed room, reading the same book I held, only ahead of me. I tried boarding the door. I tried sealing the journal in the stove and lighting it. It wouldn't burn. It didn't even warm. Every page I tore out regrew overnight, the ink darker, more aggressive. Like it wanted me to understand something before the final entry. But I didn't want understanding. I wanted escape. At dusk, the lamps flickered violently. A low sound rumbled through the floorboards, not thunder. Something turning. Something shifting beneath the house. Deep, mechanical. The sound of an enormous page turning. Then came the whispers, dozens of them, all speaking over one another. Some in English, some not. All names. I recognized none of them. Until the final whisper, Marcel, spoken in my voice. The mirror on the wall of the study bloomed with black. Ink ran upward like reverse blood, and, in its center, the therefore symbol pulsed, 3 dots circling slowly, aligning, then gone. The room dimmed, and the journal flipped open again. Page 150. The title, The One Who Writes Back. No entry beneath it, just a blank line. And a silver-tipped pen I hadn't seen before, resting on the edge of the desk, carved into its side. A question. Would you write her free? I didn't touch it. I left the room, heart hammering. The house had changed again. Corridors shorter, ceiling lower, windows nailed shut with blackened wood. No reflection anywhere. Every portrait had turned to face the wall. The house didn't want me looking at myself anymore. And yet, every shadow was shaped like me, each one sharper than the last. I passed through the front hall. The front door had vanished. In its place, a wall of pages stapled into the frame, ink still wet. They pulsed faintly with breath. When I got close, they whispered in unison, She remembers. She's further along than you. She writes in both directions. The journal hummed again. I opened it to find a new page, not numbered, only marked with the therefore symbol. In the center, she is not a memory. She is a mirror. And you have been looking too long. That's when the lights went out. Not gradually. Gone. Every flame extinguished at once. Silence crushed the air. Then, footsteps. Software barefoot. Wet. I didn't move. She stepped into the hallway from the parlor. Same dress, same hair, same sweet, impossible calm. Marcel. But not Marcel. She held the journal, my copy, in her left hand. Her right hand was soaked in ink, up to the wrist. It dripped down her forearm like veins. She smiled, and spoke without moving her mouth. Do you remember how I said you were surface level? Now I know why. You weren't hollow because you didn't care. You were hollow because you never knew how to hold a page. She took another step closer. Ink began seeping from the walls around us, soaking the carpet, crawling up my legs like vines of story. You read too much, she said. Now, let's see what happens when you're the one. Read into being. I ran. Down the west hall. past the unclaimed shelf, through the spiral chamber of mirrored shelves. Every shelf now bore a name that had been mine at some point in my life. Friend, coward, witness, author, forgetter. Each bell-shaped reflection called to me. Each shelf had a slot waiting for one final page. I stopped, turned. Marcel stood at the entrance to the room, but now her face had changed. It wasn't just hers, it was mine. One side her, one side me. Our voice, in perfect unison. Finish the entry. Page 150. It's the only way to stop the writing. The journal in my coat pocket burned. I pulled it out. The silver-tipped pen was tucked between its pages now, somehow, waiting. I didn't think. I wrote 3 words. She lets go. The ink hissed. The pen snapped, and all the shelves in the chamber collapsed. Not violently. Elegantly. Like dominoes in reverse. The air sucked in, and the therefore symbol exploded across the room. 3 dots scattering to the wind like dying fireflies. Marcel stepped back. Blinked. For the first time since I'd seen her, she looked afraid. You shouldn't have written that. Now the house will correct you. Now it'll right itself. She dissolved. Into ash. Into ink. Into the final page. I found myself back in the bedroom. The mirror gone. The journal closed. The final page, 150, complete. At the bottom, a single phrase, entry locked. She is in the page now. But the page is still in you. I look down at my hands. Black smudges on the fingers. Faint lines under the nails, the smell of ink in my hair under my tongue. I closed the book, buried it in the floor, but I can still hear it writing, 1 page at a time. And sometimes, when I sleep too long, I hear her, reading aloud. The house doesn't need me to read anymore. It's doing that on its own now. Writing, rewriting, reading what it has written, rereading what it has rewritten, over and over again. It started the morning after Marcel dissolved into the final line of page 150. I remember sitting on the bedroom floor, exhausted, empty, trying to convince myself that ending her story meant I had taken control. That I was the author again. But the journal had other plans. I hadn't touched it. And still, its pages turned, windless, soundless, but deliberate. Each time I looked at it, another page had filled itself in. Pages 151 to 157 were memories I didn't recognize, names I didn't know. Omar, shelved without record. Isabel, attempted revision, archive rejected. Rowan, self-authored, lost to the fold. People, other readers, other lives pulled into the house's pages and pressed flat like dried flowers. Not part of my story, but adjacent, parallel, stacked like leaves in a book you don't remember reading but can't bring yourself to close. By page 160, I stopped looking, but the journal kept turning. The sound of it, the faint brushing of paper, echoed through the walls like whispers trying to shape themselves into screams, and the house began to change again, this time not just in shape, but in intention. Doors that had once led to bedrooms now opened into unfinished sentences. A hallway I once knew became a corridor of living syntax, words stitched into the wallpaper, squirming just under the surface like worms in loam. The kitchen looped. I entered through one door, came out the same door, twice, and every window showed a different weather. One snow, one rain, one black sky filled with falling typewriter keys instead of stars. Even the clocks stopped pretending. They no longer kept time. They marked revisions. One of them struck first draft at midnight. Another chimed redaction accepted every hour on the hour. The worst was the grandfather clock in the parlor. Its hands spun endlessly backward, and its pendulum had been replaced with a bound wrist. Human, pale, twitching every few seconds. On the glass door, a line carved deep. When the house writes, the written remain. That was when I saw my name in the walls. Not graffiti, typeset. Perfectly aligned. Serif font. Black ink. Like a printing press had pressed my identity into the structure itself. I ran my fingers along the letters and felt warmth. A pulse. And then it wrote, he was still pretending this was a story. I tried to leave. Of course I did. I forced a door. It opened into a page. Literal paper, 10 feet tall. Blank at first, then writing itself as I moved. Every step added a line. He tried to leave. He failed. He walked backward through his own beginning. He arrived before he knew anything. The hallway behind me was gone. I turned to the page and screamed, but the page simply added, he raised his voice. The paper listened. And then it wrote silence over him, and I couldn't scream anymore. Back in the bedroom, I found the mirror had returned, but now it was larger, taller. Its frame made from the spines of books I hadn't read but somehow knew. Each title whispered something when touched. The archivist's mouth, unwriting the body, a mirror that remembers the reader who never stopped. I looked at my reflection, and it didn't copy me. It moved ahead of me, anticipating, turning before I turned, blurring when I tried to hold eye contact. It smiled when I didn't, and in its hand, it held a journal larger than mine, older, bound in something that looked like the skin of parchment turned inside out. A title was branded on the cover, The House That Writes Itself. I reached toward the glass. So did it. When our fingertips met, my skin split, not with blood, with ink. The journal on the nightstand snapped open, page 161. The house no longer needed authors. It had learned to write its own endings, but still it kept the last line blank. A space, waiting, an invitation, or a trap, or both. I stopped sleeping. I no longer felt tired. I just existed in between paragraphs now. Somewhere between sentences, drifting. The only thing keeping me from disappearing completely was the idea of a page with my name on it. Still unwritten, still waiting. I had not yet been shelved. I still had a choice. That's when I heard Marcel again, but she wasn't in the house. She was in the mirror, standing beside the version of me that wrote faster than I did. They were writing together, filling out a new journal. Every line they added appeared in mine. Page 170. He had one page left. One choice. One sentence that belonged to him alone. If he failed to write it, the house would do it for him. I sat at the desk. The silver pen returned, no longer carved with a question. Now it simply read, last line. I wrote slowly. 3 words. I don't know why those 3. Maybe they were the only ones I hadn't seen echoed back at me yet. Maybe they were all I had left. Let me go. The ink shimmered, soaked into the page like water into soil. Nothing happened. Not right away. But then, a new page turned. Page 171. Blank. But no new lines appeared. The house was waiting. I stood. The bedroom door was gone. The mirror had stopped moving. The reflection was mine again. And on the surface of the glass, a faint crack. Not in the glass. In the story. I leaned closer and whispered, I won't be written. The mirror shattered. The house screamed. Every wall flickered, glitching between rooms, between drafts, between entries that had never been opened. A single voice whispered through the chaos. If you won't be written, you must become the pen. The journal caught fire, but the flame wasn't hot. It didn't burn. It erased. Words vanished, pages turned to ash, the spine split, and where the book had been, only me remained, standing in a room that no longer recognized itself, and on the wall, a single shelf, no label, no name, but empty, waiting. The shelf waited, empty, clean, perfectly silent, like it hadn't yet decided if it should accept me or reject me. There was no label, no number, just that humming, low and patient, like a breath being held beneath the floorboards. My name wasn't anywhere, but the shape of me was. I recognized it in the shelf's dimensions, too narrow for a standard tome, too tall for a single journal. It had measured me, and the house wanted to place me. I stood there, motionless as ash from the burned journal settled into the air like snow. The mirror was gone. The reflection that had tried to write ahead of me was gone. But the pages were still turning somewhere. Not behind me, below, deep under the house. In the part of Briarhall I hadn't yet seen. The place only the house wrote about. The last chapter. I turned away from the shelf. It didn't resist, it didn't shudder or call out. But I felt something in it shift, not resentment, regret. The house let me pass. The walls didn't bleed, the doors didn't shift. The floor didn't try to drag me backward. Everything was still, but watching, as though the structure itself was reconsidering, as though it had bet on my obedience, and lost. As I walked, words appeared on the wallpaper beside me. They formed slowly, neatly, a new script. Not ink, charcoal, rough and deliberate. We gave you 171 pages. You gave us 3 words. You were supposed to break. You refused the shelf. You burned the record. Now the house is unwritten. The hall ended at a door, different from all the others. Wood black as mourning cloth. Edges lined in iron. No handle, no lock. Just 3 dots carved vertically down the center, therefore the house's signature. The unclaimed mark. The door opened at my touch. Inside, a staircase descending into pure dark. No lanterns, no light, no safety. But I understood something then, standing on the threshold. This was the true archive. Everything else, Marcel, the crawling pages, the mirrored selves, had been drafts. This place was the final edit. I descended. The steps were endless, and all around me I began to hear pages fluttering. At first, faint, then louder, rhythmic, like 1,000 books breathing in time. Then came the voices, not separate, not layered, unified. One voice made from many, speaking in a tone I could feel in my ribs. The reader walks without a script. The reader tears the margin. The reader is unfinished and will not bind. He must be inked. He must be filed. I kept moving, until the steps ended, until the ground beneath my feet changed from stone to vellum. Not stone, not wood, a floor made from skin paper, tense, veined, and in the center of the chamber a pedestal, upon it a single sheet, blank, waiting. Behind it, a wall of mirrors, every version of me I had refused to become, each holding a pen, each trembling, and in the space above them, a phrase repeated endlessly, the reader who refused the reader, who refused the reader who, until it tore itself apart. Letters bending, twisting, rearranging into a final title, The Writer Who Escaped. I stepped to the pedestal, picked up the pen, felt every shelf above me in the house hold its breath. I wrote a single line, there is no ending. The mirrors shattered, the floor cracked, the air twisted around me, not into a storm, but into possibility. An unwritten space, a story without resolution, a life without narration. And the house screamed, its voice made from stories denied, from endings unfulfilled. It tried to bind me, wrap me in margins, seal me in spine and glue, but I was already outside the page. I had chosen my own punctuation, No period, just a space, a line break, a breath. When I woke, I was outside Briar Hall. The house stood silent on the hill behind me. No windows, no door, no path. Just a structure of black stone that didn't quite belong to the world. In my pocket, not the journal, just the final sheet. The one I had written. There is no ending. On the back, a faint smear of ink still drying, still alive. I don't know what I am now. Not reader, not author, something else. A ripple between drafts. And sometimes when I pass libraries or antique stores, I feel the shelf waiting, still empty, still shaped like me. But it can wait, because I am unwritten now. And free. It was supposed to be gone. When the house lost its author, when the story refused to close, it should have folded in on itself like a book returned to the shelf and forgotten. Instead, it stayed. Not alive, not dead, just paused, waiting for the next ripple. And somewhere, in the deepest floor of Briar Hall, beneath the shelves, below the pages, far past the crawlspace of memory and ash, a name flickered back into existence. 331, not in ink, not in blood, but in dust, as though the shelf had whispered it back into the world. He refused. He escaped. But stories don't forget the ones who got away. It was a different town this time. Different house. Same foundation. The thing that had once been Briar Hall moved, not in space but in meaning. It attached itself to a new structure. A condemned boarding school in northern Maine. The kind of place that still had a coal chute and radiators with teeth. Locals said it was cursed, but no one believed in curses anymore. No one except for Ella Baird, 28. Recently fired from a university library job. Bitter, brilliant, broke. She took the caretaker position at the school because it was cheap and because she didn't mind silence. Silence meant space. Space meant thinking. Thinking meant writing. But the silence at Duncliffe boarding school was not the kind that helped anyone think. It was the kind that listened back. On her third night there, Ella found a book in the boiler room. It wasn't on a shelf. It was embedded in the wall, half melted, wrapped in gauze and spider silk. She pulled it free. The cover was a solid block of something hard, charcoal black, dry as ash. It cracked when she touched it. Inside, pages fused together, illegible, unreadable except for one, page 1, fresh, waiting. At the top, a single line in a font that looked handwritten but wrong, like the hand had belonged to something with too many fingers. You've opened what we bound. You're the first reader of the next draft. Ella didn't blink, didn't panic. She pulled a pen from her jacket and wrote beneath it. Then let's begin. The page rippled. A hum filled the air, and far below the building something turned. That night, her dreams were flooded with images. A man running down a hallway made of mirrors. A woman with her face stitched into the spine of a book. A shelf labeled unclaimed that breathed when no one watched. And a voice. Low. Constant, like the friction of paper rubbed raw. He refused. But you will rewrite. Ella woke to find the journal still on her chest. Page 2 had appeared. The text was in her own handwriting. Except she had been asleep. Ella descended the stairs without realizing she'd stood up. Her heart froze. She looked down. She was at the top of the basement steps, barefoot, still holding the journal. Page 3 wrote itself in real time. She knew what this meant, but she kept going, because the worst thing wasn't being written. The worst thing was being unread. Briar Hall had changed. It no longer needed to be a house. It had learned to disguise itself inside other structures. An abandoned hospital, a condemned school, a book forgotten in a furnace. It no longer waited for a reader. It called one. And now Ella stood in the dark heart of that call. She flipped the journal to a new page. No number, just a title. The archivist returns, and beneath it, 331 has been missing too long. Someone must find the lost shelf. Someone must turn the last page. Someone must bring him back. Ella looked into the furnace. It glowed faintly. Pages curled inside the coals, turning themselves, whispering, and one of them held a name she didn't recognize, but somehow already loved. He was the first to say no. We bound that word, but it's loose again. Find him, write him back, and so it begins again. A new archive, a new reader, and somewhere in a place outside of time and format, the story refuses to end. Because the story has found a sequel. I burned the journal, left the house, spoke the last line. There is no ending, and for a time I believed it. I walked for days or maybe hours. It's hard to measure time when you've been written by a house. I crossed fields I didn't remember ever existing, past towns where no one looked up, slept under skies that shimmered with text faintly written across the stars. But then one morning, I woke up, and there was a page, pinned to my chest. No ink, just pressure. Raised lettering I could feel more than see. A single sentence embossed into the paper like a scar. Even stories that end are still shelved somewhere. And below that, a number. 172. The page number I had never written. I tried to ignore it. I buried the page, in dirt, in water, in fire. It always came back. Sometimes folded inside my pillowcase, sometimes tucked into my shoe. Once, it reappeared inside my mouth, warm, wet, as if it had been waiting in the hollow of my throat. I spat it out, and for the first time in weeks, I heard the voice again. Software confident, familiar. Not Marcel, me, or a version of me that never got out. You closed the book, but you forgot the margins. Margins are where the dangerous things live, things that were cut from the main draft, things that were too fragmented to be bound, too broken to be given a full page. But they don't forget. They don't forgive being omitted. And now, they were coming for me. It started with the shadows, not mine, not attached to anyone, just present, sliding under doors, pooling at corners of my motel room, dripping from light fixtures that hadn't been turned on. They watched, they waited, and they wrote, tiny lines, carved into surfaces I couldn't hide, the inside of a glove, the curve of my fingernail. Once, I found a full sentence written on the underside of my eyelid. The shelf remembers. By the 7th day, I gave in. I stopped running and read the page again. Not aloud, but with my eyes wide open. This time, there was more. Page 172, the archive binds unfinished things. Shelving was denied. Refusal flagged. The reader is now marginalia. Recall authorized. That word, recall, like I was an object. Something misfiled. It wasn't a warning. It was a summons. I woke in a room I didn't recognize. Wooden beams above, red light flickering from somewhere unseen, and on the wall across from me, a mirror, not glass, polished ink. It rippled like the surface of a pond when I moved. Inside it I saw myself, but not as I was. As I'd been before the archive, younger, clear-eyed, unscarred, still believing stories were something you could close. The reflection smiled, then spoke. Page 172 begins with your return. Briar Hall is rebuilding. It has new readers now, but it never forgot its first refusal. You must witness what you unbound. The walls of the room tore open. Paper, not plaster. Thin, breathing paper pulled aside by invisible hands. And behind it, Briar Hall. But not the version I'd known. Worse. It had grown. Now, 3 stories tall, with new wings added like tumors. The windows blinked. The doors pulsed like mouths. Smoke curled from the chimney in perfect spirals of text. It was a house no longer made of brick and wood. It was made of format, of genre, of unfinished drafts sewn together in monstrous harmony. A single name burned above the front gate, the libretto. Underneath it, my name, 331 crossed out. Beneath it, margin entry 1. I stepped inside. I didn't choose to. I think I never really left. Inside, the air had changed. It tasted like wet leather and pressed flowers, like old regret and dust from books that no longer remembered their authors. The walls were pulsing with new stories, unread ones, and some of the lines I recognized. On the stairs, etched into the banister, he thought a final line could free him. In the parlor, he mistook escape for conclusion. And in the mirror above the hearth, see, he will be the next setting. Not the next reader, the next setting. That night I dreamed of Marcel again. She wasn't ink this time. She was made of torn pages, stitched into the shape of memory. She didn't speak. She handed me a new journal. It had no cover, just a spine that whispered when I touched it. The first page was blank. The second page was written. Page 173. A setting learns to write itself. A man who was once a reader becomes the house. He breathes rooms into being. He becomes format, foundation, framing. He forgets his name. He begins again. I closed the book. I threw it across the room. The walls absorbed it, like flesh. The window cracked, and through it I saw shelves rising from the garden, not with books, with people, bound at the spine, eyes open, still blinking, still reading. One of them looked like me. One of them was me, and he whispered, "The margins are how stories hold on. And you're what's between the lines now." There was no door behind me. I'd crossed the threshold of the house that used to be Briar Hall, or maybe never stopped being Briar Hall, and now I was part of it again. The air was colder, denser, like walking into the pressure of an ocean trench. My breath hung in front of me, not mist, but ink, rising in tendrils and dispersing like smoke from a dying page. The hallway was longer than it should be. Each step echoed as if the walls were listening and responding. My footsteps returned to me a second too late, like the house was mimicking my movement instead of recording it. Light flickered, not from bulbs or lanterns, but from the margins. Glowing text slithered across the borders of the wallpaper. Phrases I had read in other rooms, in other lives, now distorted and fragmented. He should not have come back. The pen remembers. Refusal is a form of authorship. You are the interlude. I tried not to look directly at the walls. That was harder than it sounds. The librettum demanded attention. It fed on it. Each room I passed was a diorama of unfinished lives. A woman stuck halfway through a screen, her mouth open but silent, her body wrapped in bibliographic string. A child drawing with broken fountain pens on the inside of a coffin lid. A man asleep at a desk, snoring. But when I looked closer, I realized he was writing with his teeth, gnawing sentences into the oak. Every one of them had a number above the door. Mine was 331. I passed 332, then 333. They kept going, thousands. I didn't want to know what mine looked like. At the end of the hall, I found a spiral staircase made from book spines. Each step gave slightly beneath my feet, creaking like old bindings. Titles groaned under my weight. The binding of self, margins as identity, reader/witness/host. It felt like a descent, but the staircase led up. The top floor was cathedral-wide. The ceiling vanished into black. Rows of floating pages hovered in the air, spinning slowly. Between them, librarians moved, faceless, tall, made of yellowed paper and stitched thread. They did not speak. They categorized. I hid behind a pillar carved from index cards, watching as one librarian picked a floating page from the air, rolled it tight, and inserted it into a human mouth mounted in the wall. The mouth swallowed. The wall sighed. Then it whispered, "Stored." I crept forward. The center of the room held a plinth, and upon it a single sheet of paper, suspended by breath, held aloft by something exhaling endlessly from below. The page bore a title, Reconciliation Draft, 331, and beneath it a single line, "He must become setting." I reached for the page. Everything in the librettum stopped. The librarians turned their heads. The floating pages paused. The mouth in the wall began to gag, and from behind me, a voice. "You cannot take what you have already written." I turned. It was me, but not the reflection from before. This version of me was older, paler. His body marked in marginalia, thin, delicate notes written in tiny script across his skin, footnotes curled around his neck like veins. "You thought rejection was escape," he said. "But refusal is simply another type of authorship. You have authored this." He gestured to the librettum. I backed away from the plinth. Number I destroyed the journal. I refused the shelf. I walked away. You did. And what is a walk away, if not a narrative arc? He stepped closer. You didn't leave the story. You expanded its scope. You stretched the format. You made room for the house to grow. Behind him, the walls cracked. From the gaps, words spilled. Sentences fell like insects. Paragraphs curled in the air. A wind made from language, howling across the ceiling. Now you're more than a reader. You're lore. I grabbed the page. It burned me. The text seared into my skin, curling around my wrist, branding me with the new title. "Setting 331, I screamed. The scream bent the air. The librettum responded. Shelves shifted. The ceiling collapsed upward. The librarians turned inward and consumed each other. The walls folded like origami. And I saw myself standing at the center of it all, not reading, not writing, but housing it. The archive was no longer a place. It was me. I woke in my bed, but the bed was paper, the sheets written in red, my skin bound. The walls around me hummed. Somewhere, below all this, the next reader was arriving. A girl. Curious, angry, someone who believed in endings. She'd open her journal soon. She'd read about me. She'd think I had a choice. Maybe she'd believe she did too. But I'll be waiting, in the margins. And when she writes the wrong word, I'll turn the page. The first time she saw my name, it wasn't on a page. It was in the mirror, etched into fog that hadn't been there seconds earlier. She hadn't touched the faucet. No steam, no condensation. But the glass was misted, and carved into it, with surgical precision, was a number that meant nothing to her. 331. It shimmered faintly, like something recently etched but already fading. She blinked, wiped at it. It didn't smear, didn't disappear. It deepened, like it was being rewritten in real time. She stepped back, heartbeat rising in her ears. The bathroom light flickered overhead, once, then again. When it steadied, the number was gone. But now, something else had changed. The silence. Duncliffe boarding school was never truly quiet. Even abandoned, the place creaked like old lungs exhaling through dust. But now, it was absolutely still. Dead. Like the building had held its breath. She turned to leave the bathroom and found a book sitting on the floor. Not left. Placed. The journal was smaller than the ones she remembered from the library's archive room. Not leather-bound, but something tougher, smoother. It was warm to the touch. The cover bore no title, only a symbol stamped in the center. Therefore, 3 black dots arranged vertically, waxed, faintly cracked. She opened it slowly, fingers trembling before she knew why. Inside, a single sentence on the first page. Welcome, reader, 641. She read it aloud. The page inhaled. It actually lifted and curled toward her face as if smelling her voice. Then it flattened, and beneath the greeting, new text appeared. The archive is not closed. The refusal has created a rift. A page was left unwritten. You must return the ending. She turned the page. Nothing. Then she reached for her pen. She didn't know why she did it. Curiosity, maybe, or defiance, or the unbearable tension of silence that had grown claws and was raking her spine. She pressed the nib to the empty page and wrote. What was refused? The ink vanished. A heartbeat later, the page replied. Refusal to become. Refusal to be bound. Refusal to end. Reader 331 is now setting 331. She frowned. The name again. Who is 331? The one who left before closing the story. He opened the margins. He made space for you. The lights above her buzzed. And in the mirror, no longer fogged, she saw someone step behind her. But when she turned, no one was there. That night, her dreams bled. They weren't linear. They weren't even images. They were footnotes. An endless stream of annotations dancing in peripheral vision. He burned the shelf, but the ash still breathes. Do not index what writhes. The door marked unclaimed is never truly locked. She woke to find the journal open beside her, not where she'd left it. And her pen, her favorite fountain pen, was dry, even though she hadn't touched it. On the page, page 4, Witness Protocol initiated. Reader 641 has begun reconciliation draft. Archive. Axis is shifting. New setting forming. She shut the book. It trembled in her hands. She avoided mirrors the next day. Avoided writing. But the house began to rewrite her instead. When she walked through the west wing, the hallway extended. 4 doors became 7. The windows grew taller. The wallpaper became script. Sentences running upward like vines, speaking in silence. At one point, she opened a broom closet, found it full of teeth, not scattered, filed, each tooth engraved with a name. One of them had hers. She returned to the journal. You must write him back. He is fading, and when he is gone, so is your path out. She opened a new page and began to write 331. I see you. I will write you back. The room shivered. Dust lifted from the floorboards and rearranged into words. Good. Now come see what you're meant to finish. She entered a room she didn't remember existing. It looked like a reading room, wood-paneled, candlelit, with tall armchairs and bookshelves that reached the ceiling. But all the books had no titles, just numbers. She passed 178, 289, 330, then at the far end, 331. She touched the spine. The book hissed, pages fluttered, and from the chair beside her, a man stood, hollow-eyed, skin cracked with footnotes, voice like a story being unmade. You shouldn't be here, she answered. Neither should you, he smiled sadly. I said no. I was the first to refuse. That makes you the last to accept. She looked at the journal in her hand. It had opened again. And the page said, Scribe the ending. Restore closure. Retire. Setting 331. He stepped closer. If you write me out, you take my place, she hesitated. And if I don't, then the story doesn't end. And the house grows. And the next reader inherits twice the burden. She turned the page, wrote, You became setting. I won't. I'll become authorship. The room convulsed. Shelves cracked. Candles extinguished. Every book in the room opened at once, pages flapping like wings, text screaming into the air. He lunged at her. She stabbed the pen into the journal. Ink bled. So did he. His body turned into sentences, unwritten, unbound. She caught one phrase before he vanished. Refusal was a beginning. Then he was gone, and the number above the book changed. 331. Retired. She left the room. Duncliffe had returned to normal. Mostly. The journal was still with her. But the pages were still. For now. On the back cover, a new message appeared. Authorship delegated. Reader 641. The archive awaits your additions. She looked into the nearest mirror, saw herself, and deep behind her own eyes. The margins shifted. The next story was already waking. It begins where endings pretend to happen. Ella stood before the last door in the archive. Not a metaphor, not a symbol, a real, physical door. Oak, darkened with age, carved with every number that had ever been assigned to a reader. All of them. From 001 to 641. And now, above the handle, 642. Her number. She hadn't written it, not directly. But the archive had. Because she'd answered the call. Because she'd survived. Because she'd refused to shelve the man who once said no, and instead claimed the title of author herself. Behind this door was the shelf eternal. Not a library. Not anymore. Something else. Something waiting to see if she'd follow through, or write a new rule. She placed her hand on the knob, and opened the end. There was no light. Not at first. But there was sound. Not a hum or whisper, but the soft, thudding rhythm of pages being closed, one after another, as if the archive were in the process of forgetting. As her eyes adjusted, shapes appeared. Shelves, impossibly tall, arranged in spirals. Endless volumes wrapped in linen, sealed in glass, buried under annotations that screamed when she passed. But none of them moved. None of them breathed. They were dead stories, shelved before they were ready. She descended the spiral walkway. There were no stairs, only a slope made of pressed parchment, curving down around the shelves. Each shelf bore a title, Those Who Looked Too Soon. Those who wouldn't stop reading. Those who thought it was just a book. Those who refused and paid. She found his shelf at the bottom. 331. Refusal-initiated setting collapse. Unbound. The volume was still warm. It pulsed beneath the glass, like something trying to breathe. She removed the case. Inside, no book, just a mirror. She looked in, saw herself, and then him behind her, or inside her. It didn't matter now. You're not supposed to be here, he said. She didn't flinch. Neither were you. But here we are. If you shelve me, you seal the archive again. And if I don't, it keeps growing. So be it. She reached into the mirror, not with her hand, with a sentence. I refuse to finish you. I will rewrite you. The glass cracked. The shelves groaned. One by one they opened, not like doors, like mouths. And from within, voices spilled out. Let me out. I never got to end. I was supposed to choose. They read me wrong. Ella se tambaleó hacia atrás. All around her the stories were unshelving themselves. A library turning inside out. The archive was unraveling. And somewhere, beneath the chaos, the journal in her pocket whispered one last line. Authority transfer, finalized. No more readers, only writers. She screamed, or maybe she sang, or maybe both. The shelves collapsed upward. The paper sky burned, and Ella became the ink. They found her body weeks later, or what was left of it, in a school that hadn't existed for decades. She sat in the middle of a ruined reading room, surrounded by mirrors, each one cracked in identical spiderweb patterns. Her hand clutched a book. The title read, The Briar Hall Archive, written by 641, read by none. The book is now closed. But the story isn't, because somewhere, someone is reading these words right now. Maybe and you think you're safe because you can close this. You can lock your door. You can forget 331. Forget Ella. Forget the way mirrors sometimes flicker when you're alone. But stories don't end because you stop reading. They end when you stop being read. And somewhere, in a house shaped like memory, the shelves are waiting, and your number is already written. The end. Thank you for listening to The Night Reader. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, remember, you're not alone. The stories we carry are what connect us. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment letting me know. Where are you listening from? And what story do you carry? Until next time, keep your light close and your shadows closer.